Greetings, greetings. How's it going? Boom. Welcome. I am so sorry that we have had to change between Facebook and coming into Zoom, but this is the reality of technology. We failed to literally connect into Facebook, and unfortunately, yeah, we've had to come into Zoom, and I am so grateful that you guys were able actually to just quickly move from Facebook in coming into Zoom. Hey, how's it going? My name is TJ, Taurai Jack. If you don't know me, well, now you do. And I've got other guests today, and these are the people that make M5 wonderful. And if you've never seen them, never heard of them, I don't work alone. I work with real people. And today you're seeing them, yeah? And there's around about 6 of us in the team. And today you are seeing around about the 80% of it, the 4 of us out of the 6. And because this is a session that we were hoping to have on Facebook, I just want to put out a disclaimer that we are going to be recording this so that it can go also onto our YouTube, and we can stream the same thing onto our Facebook, because that was the intention in the first place. So this is a live discussion that we are having of the actual properties, one of the properties that has given us enormous nightmares within the recent times. So we are going to have a conversation with everybody just to make sure that everyone understands that particular, what we are talking about. Okay, good stuff. Let's talk about it. I am going to go through to the other guys, and let me jump on to the other team members and introduce the other team members. Right, I'm going to start with Daniel. Daniel, how's it going? Welcome aboard.
Thank you, TJ. How's it?
All right, good. So just to give an indication there, Dan, he is solely responsible for acquisition within the team. He is part of the team as well. And the only reason why I started off with Daniel without honoring the lady who is in the house is because I just wanted to go into a systematic way where I'm going to be talking to the individual in generally on how you acquire a deal. So Daniel, he is one of those people that is key in terms of deal acquisition. So that's the first thing that you do, right, when you've got a deal. And now that you've got a deal, it's on board, there's some legal around it that needs to go through in terms of the acquisition process. And this is where Elize falls in. Elize, how's it going?
Good afternoon, always good, thank you. It's awesome to be here.
All right, wonderful. And now that you have acquired it and it is factually yours and the deeds have done all their things and all of those things, you now need to manage the actual property. The person who is solely responsible for managing within our team the property is none other than Mr. Make Sure. You do know who's Mr. Make Sure, right? Make Sure. It is Bevin Thomas. Bevin, how's it going?
TJ, yeah, good to be on here again with all of you. Always making sure that you're awesome.
Making sure that you're awesome. I like that. Okay, cool. Right. So we're not going to waste a lot of time in terms of, traditionally we would have gone in to ask people where they're dialing from, but we can see that there's quite a lot of people. Thanks, guys. I'm going to mention some of the names that I'm seeing here. Thanks, Bridget's iPhone. Bridget's got an iPhone. Yeah. Well, some of us, we roll with the Samsungs, But anyways, welcome, Bridget. There's a Christopher. There's Elize. There's Matthews. There's V. Winston, Nevin, Neba, Sade, and the list goes on. But nonetheless, I am wanting to just make sure that I've acknowledged people that are in the room for now, but we are going to go ahead. So let's go ahead and talk about this particular property. Daniel, you found this property that we are talking about. Let's just talk about it, right? Give us the description of what this property is all about. And also, maybe before you start on to talk about the actual property, give us a snippet of what is your role in M5 in terms of acquisition.
Okay, cool. must start off by saying, in terms of M5 and my role, I mainly acquire, well, I'm responsible for acquiring properties in the Joburg, basically say in the Gauteng area. We work with another partner of ours who's not on the court at the moment, like TJ said, there's 6 of us, which is you. But between Pretoria and Joburg, that's what I'm responsible for mainly in terms of acquiring these deals. And this particular property, just to give you a little bit of a description before we go into it, it's actually it's a residential property in a residential area. It's 2,000 square meters of single family dwellings, and there's about 13 self-contained units in it. And all those 13 units sit on half of the piece of land because it's 2,000 square meters. All those units are sitting on 1,000 square meters. So there's another 1,000 square meters of free or of unoccupied, unbuilt, very natural land. And it's sitting close to a very densely populated area in Joburg. Basically, that means the rental demand is quite high, which is the reason why we actually acquired it. And this property is actually it wasn't really well maintained, which is the reason I think the seller actually wanted to sell it. So that's the nutshell of it, of what the type of property you're looking at and what we're about to discuss here.
So Dan, for a lot of people, they might not figure out what is 2,000 square meters, right? In terms of a size of a soccer pitch, how many soccer pitches is that? Is that 2 or 1?
In terms of soccer pitches, I think it's a soccer pitch. Basically, one soccer pitch. Basically, 2 halves.
Okay.
Okay. Yeah.
Right. I'm just trying to, we're not there, right? So this is a show and tell. So I want people to comprehend what is 2,000 square meters, because for a lot of us, we are either staying in a complex and we actually don't know the size of our own houses, later on the size of our own houses, right?
Yeah. Not the classic soccer pitch, the proper soccer pitch. It's 2 halves.
Okay, good. Yeah. Okay, good. So this is almost, it's 2,000 squares, so which means that you've got a very big yard on it. And then you say that it is in a residential area, so which means that from a zoning perspective, it is a Res 1, right?
Yes, it is a Res 1 at the moment, but because it's,
Okay. The beauty about, or where the opportunity lies within this property is that when we bought it, the units that are there, so let's just put it in perspective, there is one big house, the old English houses, right? And this house had already been sectionalized into units, right? From a plan perspective. And then on one side of the yard, you also have 2 units that are there. And just give us a description of what people would traditionally call cottages, but now these are not just cottages anymore because they are actually set up in a proper house setup. So as you drive into the we now call it a complex actually, but as you drive in on your left hand side, you've got a 1 bed, 1 bath that is there, right?
Mm-hmm.
And behind it, you've got another 1 bed, 1 bath as well, self-contained. Right. And on your left hand side, you've got an upstairs, right? Which is a 2 bed, 1 bath, right? And below it is also a 2 bed, 1 bath.
Yes.
And you still haven't gotten through to the main house, but on the right hand side, there is also an additional, and I think it's a 3 bed, it's 2 units that are 2 beds, 1 bath that are attached together, right? Mm-hmm. And all of these, they were all there, on the plan, which is the beauty of it, because you didn't have to go and rezone. It's there on the plans. That's where the opportunity actually lied, existed. And over and above that, you still have the house as well, that was also kind of like split into two when we go through to the property.
Yeah, basically that's what it is. You've described it very perfectly in terms of the outside dwellings that are available in the property. In the house itself, you actually had 5 bedrooms that have been turned into self-contained units. Basically, they had a kitchenette and a sitting area, and basically a small bedroom. Some of them shared a bathroom because there were 2 bathrooms in the area, and the kitchen has sort of like also been subdivided into 3, and also sharing a different bathroom. And some of the colonial style house that you described, some of their balconies were also turned into self-contained units. That's how you come into a total of 13 units.
Okay, good. So having said that, the opportunity was kind of like there. It's a no-brainer, right? To say that there was a good rental income, and the 13,000. 13 units in there. When you got to the property, describe for us the seller. How did you even buy the property? How did you find it?
Okay, I'm gonna go first down to the training and the mind of an investor. Basically, what you train is as an investor when you start in this thing is that there are different ways of looking and finding and acquiring properties.
Right.
One of the first ones is you gotta make sure that you got your ear on the ground, right, around your area. Basically, that what it means is you gotta know the estate agents that are available in the area and who's selling. And if anybody wants to sell a house on their own, if an owner wants to sell the house on their own, usually they go to complexes and they plug certain things. So you gotta know all those things. And with regards to that, on top of that is actually, you gotta meet the guys. You gotta make sure you have meetings with the estate agents, let them know who you are and what you're looking for. So that's the first part. And the second part would be your digital platforms, which are your Property 24s and your private properties. And you go through there, and a whole lot of people would say that, when it comes to private property and everything that has already hit the market, it's actually quite high priced. But with this ones, and what I prefer to do mainly, even though the first system, what I've described in terms of keeping your ear on the ground is always very valuable. I find that, your digital platforms as well are quite useful in finding these properties. And remember, everything is negotiable. So with this particular properties, I found it on Property 24. Basically, I logged in and I get notifications on my emails. Basically, just trying to create a funnel between private property and Property 24. I created a funnel, and this was one of the properties that hit my emails. And I had a look at it, contacted the agent, and went to go see it. So that's basically how I found the property.
Okay, cool. Thanks, Daniel. I was going to say thank you, video. I was going to say that we have lost video there from Daniel. I'm sure he's going to come back on video. Now, so you went through and you saw the opportunity. At that time, was it a good opportunity, not a good opportunity? What was the next kind of like basic steps that you did for you to see that this was a good opportunity? It hit your mailbox. But anyone can do this, right? You can get a whole lot of emails coming through, but what gave you the gut feel that this is a good deal for you to go and see? I don't know how many emails hit your mailbox.
Yes. Yeah, it's hundreds, hundreds of emails hit the mailbox, and I have a system of working through them daily. Basically, starting with the last ones and working through it. So I was working through my emails, and as you go through emails and you see these properties hit your emails, and when you open them, first things that I look at, small things like, is it commercial or is it not? How many units and what's the rental? So when I look at the rental and I look at how much it was priced for, how much the seller is trying to get rid of it for, it sort of like makes sense. At first, at face value, it still made money. There was still good return on investment, but that's where you start. Number one, it requires, there's words that estate agents use like TLC. It requires TLC here and there. So those are the keywords that you look for, and the rental and the pricing. So those three actually sort of like grabbed my attention. And as I looked into the deal a little bit further, you start looking at the pictures, you're understanding what you could do and what it looks like from the pictures. So after that, then I did my numbers on the current sale price and the current rental, and it was still a good deal. But then we have a motto of how much we require as a return on investment. Then trying to judge that and how much I can negotiate, then that became a good deal for me. I felt comfortable enough that I can negotiate to a price that I would be comfortable with, and all our partners would be comfortable to invest in.
Right. Okay. So there you are now. You've got you've gone on site. Had you worked with this estate agent before?
No, I hadn't worked with Jane before. It was one of our first time. It was the first property actually that we worked together on. We worked on other properties after this, but this was actually the first one. So it was my first meeting with her when we went to view.
Okay, good stuff. There's a question here that says, do you guys not have pictures to show? What I'm going to do, Molais, is that we are going to actually send you a link on here of the Facebook video that we took, that we shot at that place, which was around about 21 weeks ago when we moved in. And I've got that. It's a short video that I'm going to share with you there, so that we'll share it on here, and then everyone else can go back and look. But I think for the meantime, let us go through the journey of Daniel now on after seeing this. You ran the numbers, Daniel, and it made sense, right? It's in an area not far away from Yorville. It's a street away from Yorville. And out of that now, what was the price on the market?
Basically, these houses around the area go anywhere between 2.3 to 2.7 million.
Yeah, but this one, that we're talking about, what was it?
This one was priced at 2.2.
Okay. Eventually,
2.2 million.
Eventually it settled for?
Eventually we settled at 1.8 million.
1.8 million. Okay, good stuff. Well done on that one. Now, and I just want us to talk about why actually did the seller actually decide to sell at a price like that, right? What were some of the problems that were, number one, visible to you? And number two, what were some of the problems that you, at the time, not now, but at the time, just you engaging with the estate agent, that you were thinking that there could be other problems here, and what gave you the guts to actually now negotiate to a 1.8? Because this is the question that comes from everyone else. How do you negotiate to that? So it's always about dealing with the problem, right? Is there a problem? Are you solving it? In this scenario, this house that we're talking about here, what was the challenge?
Basically here there are two problems. Number one is what the seller's problem is in terms of personal or business or whatnot. Then the second one is basically the state of the property. So one of the first things that when I got in at the property meeting with the estate agent, just the sheer state of the property, basically you could see that it did require quite a bit of maintenance, meaning that you're probably dealing with an absent seller or somebody that really doesn't care much for the property. So when you got there, you realize that there's quite a lot of work that you still need to do to get it to a state where you are comfortable with to get proper tenants in. So that's the first point of negotiation, that I still need to do work on the property to look a certain way so I can attract a decent tenant. Then the second part about it was the...
So was we are on the first part done? Let's speak in real life terms, right? This investor, or should I say the seller, was absent.
Yeah.
Right? They're from somewhere in West Africa, and they were managing it remotely. The husband stays here. The wife is the one who used to manage this thing for the family. The husband is very busy. He's a doctor, so all of his time is consumed by being a doctor. So the wife actually, who is actually stays out of the country, is the one who's actually managing this, which was also one of your big problems.
Yes.
Right.
That was one of the biggest problems, yes.
Yeah, which will explain a little bit further, because it's one of the key things that have actually made this deal to be extremely, extremely difficult.
Yeah, it's extremely difficult when you cannot, if there's any problems in your property, you cannot get there within a day or two. So if you're managing it from a different country, that's even worse, because putting as much money into a property and as much time into a property actually it separates a property from a successful property and a very delicate property that would eventually become a burden onto you. So these sellers actually had that state. The doctor was working, and he full time into his profession. The wife was managing it from a different country. So you find that that's the reason why they're getting rid of it, because nobody had enough time to actually get to the property and do the necessary things that they needed to do, even when it comes to acquiring new tenants. They sort of like relied on the current tenants to acquire other tenants. They didn't know what was happening in their property. Sometimes you had guys that rented property or rented spaces and actually had more than 4 or 5 people living in one room instead of what they agreed to in terms of their leases. So that was the biggest thing, and that was the reason why they decided to sell the property, which for us, because of the technical expertise that we have, was an opportunity for us to come in, clean up, and actually try to get this property into a level where we can squeeze as much good out of it as we can and actually turn it around. So I saw that opportunity because of the expertise and the team that we had.
Okay, good. So thanks, Daniel. I'm going to go to Elize there because Elize is looking lonely. But Elize, I want to bring in a different conversation here, because I think when you're now acquiring a property like this one, we all do know that from an offer to purchase, the tradition is that the seller needs to decide who the conveyancer is, which I'm totally against, because I'm the one who's paying for it as the buyer. I've never really understood that process. Number one, can we change that? That's my question, number one. Number two, if I am paying deposit and I'm paying deposit to a conveyancer that I don't know, this is my money, right? And it might be, in this case, I think we paid about maybe just below 200,000 in terms of deposit, because the bank didn't give us 100%. So I'm giving my 200,000 now to a conveyancer that I don't know, who is a relationship with the buyer. And I have no control here. As a property investor, right, how important, control is very key for me. For us as a business, which is why Bevin is here, to make sure that we have control of all of our properties. I thought, let me just throw it out there to put a smile on his face. But the thing is that the system kind of like dictates the other way around. As a property investor, can I change that? And if I can change that, how? What is the practical way I can do that?
The exciting thing about this is if you ask, most probably the people will agree, because most sellers don't even know conveyancing attorneys.
Right.
They are usually guided by the agents, and the agents usually suggest the attorneys where they, have a relationship. Sometimes they get some more benefit from attorneys if they send work their way. But I've seen, especially these days, there's been a very big trend to say, listen, I want to use my attorney because firstly, if you use your attorney, that you already have a good deal negotiated. And if you're going to use the seller's attorney, they're not going to give you that benefit. So definitely to ask is the first thing. And usually the person that you have to convince the most is usually the agent, because they are usually the one really influencing the sellers.
I see. When you're saying ask, how do you ask?
So the nice thing is, and especially in a deal like this, is if you show that you are serious to buy, and you say, listen, I will buy this property on this is my conditions and I want to use my attorneys. I actually really find that if you take that approach, they will consider it, except if you're using, and you use reputable attorneys. I think that's also important. If you use a reputable attorney and you say, listen, this is the attorneys I use, they are conveyancers, they are good. I have a good relationship with them because I do a lot of deals. I want to use that as part of the deals. And it's very seldomly. The only time when that was really an obstacle that I've seen is in the past, if the seller himself is an investor and he's got a good relationship with these attorneys.
Sure.
So, because he's most probably want to sell, but he wants to buy well, and then he wants discount. So that's one time where it might not be successful. Or as I said, if the agent is really pushing it on his way.
Okay, good stuff. Now, the reason why I ask of this is that in a deal like this one, right, and Dan, you need to jump in here and keep me straight. The sellers were out of the country. When it came to, and we're still just talking about acquisition here, we're not done with the acquisition. When it came to signing the paperwork and things like that, the husband and wife are married in community of property. The husband went to sign, the wife needed to go and sign, but boom, they were stuck in wherever they were in West Africa. I think at a point she was stuck in Congo, I think, right?
Yes.
And there was a travel ban of sort, right? So there we are now. We've got our money stuck at the conveyancer that if you do it like any other person to a conveyancer that you don't know, yes, you're getting a little bit of a return, but who knows? They're giving you maybe a 5%. But the money could be earning a little bit more if it is your attorney that you know that they deal. And that's why we have fees as a business partner, because we have control of these things. Not any other attorney is going to give us now a 5% on our money. We can get top of what is being provided in the market. And that's making our money work hard for us at this time. Giving the example of this lady now, she's stuck in Congo, she can't travel through, and the process is just delayed. And the conveyancer who is on the seller side, who is working for the seller, is going to just say, I am going to wait for the seller to come in and sign. But the advantages of having my conveyancer working on the deal is that, because, for an example, Elize is working on our behalf. She's got her interests on our team. And if it was Elize working for you as your attorney, then obviously she has you as her interest on you, not on the seller. So she's put pressure for this thing to happen, right? And I think that's the benefit of having the conveyancer to be on your side, to appoint your own. People generally ask, why would I want to have that? but when things go wrong, then you can do that. But the best one is that you can get your money back very quickly. And if we've put in a deposit, I can say, Elize, I've pulled out of this deal, then we get the money back. If the money is sitting with the seller's conveyancer, what's the worst that you've seen, Elize, in getting the money back?
Well, I actually got an inquiry where somebody said, unbeknown to the purchaser, the attorney actually started to pay some of the commissions and everything, a part of the deposit that was paid. Which is absolutely terrible, because now to try and get that money back is going to be an issue. But I think also is if there's the cost involved, there's various reasons, who's liable for the cancellation and all the reason. But the attorney is going to hold on to that money, and because they're going to try and recover whatever cost they can from there before they pay it out. Because they know, attorneys are grudge buyers. So while you've got the money, hold on to it, and then you make the parties pay, fight with each other. So it's going to say, listen, purchaser, I agree, you should get your money back, but you must get it now from the seller. The money paid in, we're going to keep that for our cost.
Okay, good stuff. In this scenario here, we've digressed a little bit, but there's a good lesson around it. In this scenario, we had the lady in Congo. Eventually, she came back and she signed. And after signing, we had another small stumbling block with the bank. Dan, you remember that part? When the bank came out to do an assessment. So an AIP was sent out, and they had an assessor who came out, a property evaluator, and they said they're comfortable with the value of the property, but in the main house, they wanted the main house to be put back, especially in the kitchen, to be put back into the original state. Because what the seller had done, they'd stripped off the kitchen. It was now just a shell. You couldn't actually see where's the kitchen, right? Dan, it took us a bit of time to motivate to the banks. We needed to motivate and also give an indication to the fact that we were going to make it back to the original state. What are the steps that we took in doing that?
This is actually a very good one, because this was one of my first that I had to do like this. Right. One of the first properties, because usually you buy property and the bank finances as it is based on your calculations. This one, particularly, the bank was really concerned that the main house, especially the kitchen, was subdivided. Yeah. And they were saying, we understand that it looks good. We are happy with the value of the house. We are happy with the purchase price because it's valued at far much more than the purchase price. But how the main house is being utilized at the moment actually sort of like, it makes them very concerned. They want to pull away. And what we then said is, what do you want us to do? And they said, just make the main house more presentable. And get the kitchen back to a state where it's supposed to. So what we did is we had to go back into the property again, which I think this was a 2-week exercise, 2 to 3 weeks exercise, where we had to go in, assess the damage, assess what we needed to do. Then we had to indicate to the bank, basically write up a whole method statement on how we're going to fix each and every one of those problems, and how much we have allocated, how much budget we can allocate to fixing those problems. And we had to actually give them a program, and not just a program was to say that on the 1st of the month we're going to start and on the 15th we're going to finish. This was a detailed construction program where we had to draw it up for them to say, we're going to start site establishment at this time, and this is what we're going to do on this day and this day, this week. Basically give them a Gantt chart of every single step that we're going to do up until how it's going to look and how much we're going to spend. So that was a 2 to 3 weeks exercise, which I'm sure quite a lot of people haven't gone through this, which I haven't, but because of my construction background, it was quite easy for me to do it. But I hadn't gone through it in an investment space where the bank says, we like the property, we want to do this deal with you, but we are uncomfortable with these parts. And how will you fix them? Give us a method statement, give us that motivation, so that we are comfortable that when we give this money, you would actually be able to run this property and actually bring the return on investments that you are showing us. So
Right.
that was, that's sort of like a curveball that we hadn't received before.
And that stalled for about a 2 weeks, 3 week gap. And then eventually the grant came in. But I also want to give an indication of the actual property as well. So this is a big yard, but it actually lies between two roads, something else that we didn't mention there. So the house is on here. On one side is a street, there's an entrance. On the other, on the back of the yard, there's also a street. So this house, you can actually literally have two entrances on different streets. And from a development perspective, it just presents itself with many opportunities, because now you've got one side of the yard where all of this that we're talking about, the 13 units are, and then at the back of it is just empty land, but there's a street there, and now you can have another gate there. There's a pedestrian gate, and you can actually come in there, and if you want, you can replicate everything that is on the other side, actually, and you've bought this property for 1.8.
Which was one, actually, that was one of the biggest selling points as well, because that's the one street, of course, it's directly linked to Yovo. So it's a vehicle entrance and a pedestrian gate on one side that you can access directly to Yovo. Then on the other side, there is a pedestrian gate alone, but that pedestrian gate actually gives you access to a gated neighborhood.
Right.
Which and that was our biggest seller, because then we can develop this thing and probably close the other gate and just open a bigger entrance on the gated neighborhood side, where we can then develop it into anything 2-3 stories, whatever we want, and just have access on that side alone.
But at the moment, how much rent were you collecting, or should I say, when you got into the property, what was the total rent? You know, you got an 1,800,000 bond, and what was the total rent there?
Total rent was 35,700.
Boom.
Yeah.
Okay, that's a good deal, I think.
Yes, that is 40% ROI.
Yeah, so you got a 40% return on investment there. So why do we then label this as a big problem deal or as a bad problem deal? You know, I mean, 40%, that doesn't sound bad to me.
It doesn't sound bad at all. It's actually a really good deal. It's actually a really good deal. You know, it gets your fingers sort of.
I'm going to jump into the problems here, because I think we have done enough to actually just show the picture of what this deal is all about. But what are the problems? And number one, this deal here was when we moved in between offices. Frost Peak was coming into play. We were still self-managing at the time, and a lot of the tenants, they are foreign-based. Not to say that any foreign-based tenants are bad. No, that's not what we're saying here. There's a point to it a little bit later, because Elize needed to learn how to translate at some point. But as it may, let's talk about it. Okay, so we've got a deal, and we moved in, and when we were moving in, from an operational perspective, we were between Frost Peak and self-managing. So we sent out a letter on one end. In this letter, we were saying that, hey, we are the new owners. But Frost Peak was at the back of that. These are the guys that are going to be collecting. Immediately, the tenants was like, whoa, there's 2 people here. Who are these 2 people? We don't know you. So are you the new owner of the house? What is happening? In the same breath, they then also said they spoke to the old landlord, and the old landlord had also told the people that, no, he's not selling his house. their house is being taken back with the bank. So the narrative that they got was also incorrect. So we moved in immediately. I remember Daniel and I visiting that property at one point, and immediately we were faced with a resistance in terms of the people just didn't know who we were. At the back of that, we had 14 inquiries with the previous landlord to say that let's go and do a handover, but he was not just available to meet us. I remember the one day, Danny and I, we ended up saying we were going to meet at 5 o'clock. We got there at 5, and because this guy is a doctor, he needed to go and do his normal run for 6 o'clock, but he didn't pitch up. Instead, he called everyone and told everyone, you need to listen to these people, they're the new landlords. And it just made things a little bit more worse, right? The reality of it is that the husband is not the person who was actually managing this. It was the wife. But this time around, the wife is not there. She's in Congo or wherever country she was at that time. This was our first big problem. And they felt that their rights were being abused. And they reported us to the tribunal court. And I called Elize. I said, Elize, we got a letter from the tribunal court. What should we do? Elize, who is the tribunal court? How can they help me as a landlord? How do they help the tenant? Let's start from there before we actually dive into the problem that we had, that landed us, me and you. I remember me and you, we were at the tribunal court.
Yeah, the tribunal was created by the Housing Act, the Housing Tribunal Act, and it was there to make access for landlords and tenants much more affordable and approachable, because you don't need a legal representative to go to the tribunal like when you have to go to court. So they deal with issues specifically between landlords and tenants. So if a landlord can go there, if the tenant is not paying rent, and they will adjudicate it, and if they make a ruling after arbitration, is as good as getting a judgment in the magistrate's court. But in the same breath, the tenants can go there, and usually your tenants use that avenue much more because it's easier for them to go and just lay a complaint. And the moment a complaint is laid by the tribunal, it sort of holds everything. And you can't just, for example, if something is laid in the tribunal, you can't just go and evict. You can't just go and issue because it's there and it has to be adjudicated. And I think also sometimes, there's going to be an influx, I think, of people going to the tribunal even after the lockdown, and it can take very long to get anything resolved. If you're not really on top of people immediately, and especially the complaints, it doesn't even have to have any reason or foundation or merit in it, and people can make a complaint. So, but the whole reason is it has to have, anybody can go there and must be able to lodge a complaint.
Okay. In this case, they went out to the tribunal court and they said, number one, they wouldn't like to pay rent because they're not so sure who the landlord is. And number two, they also want to know who the landlord is. So it meant that from the time of complaint, we were not able to collect rent.
Yeah, I think one of the biggest frustrations with this matter was that, they claimed that to say that they don't know who's the owner, who must they pay. And I think that is usually the nicest defense of any tenant. If they can have that opportunity, they use it. Yeah. And I remember that we immediately, gave them information and tried to convey as much as possible to say, listen, you don't have to have that concern. Here's everything explained. And even when we had the letter coming from the tribunal, we immediately sent a letter back to the tribunal and said, listen, but we are the owners. Here's the proof. This is the owners. Here's the communications. Yeah. And because the tenants then really went and, they insisted they want to have a meeting, irrespective of what is this. They want a meeting to confirm who's the owner of the property.
Right.
And I think that is what the one that we caused, that we actually had to go and have a hearing.
So, Elize, in my view, that for me was not the problem. The real problem was that you were dealing with one person who is English speaking, and then you had 12 people who are non-English speaking, and they're all French speaking.
Yeah, they're all French.
And it's a hearsay of what the one person who is English speaking says. At one point, we were almost wanting to do translation into French with all of our documentation so that we could just be able to get our message clear to them. But this was a tactic actually the guys utilized, because they knew very well that if lodge a complaint, it's going to take nothing less of about 2 months to be addressed. In those 2 months, they're not paying. And if it gets resolved, they're only going to pay at the end of the month. So which meant that it is actually 3 months that they haven't paid. And that's exactly what happened.
And I think these tenants especially took the advantage of the time period, because it happened everything in December. And they know that, not a lot happens from middle December to middle January. And I think they even hoped that that would push out the time periods. If we weren't really pushing and said, no, this is the situation, and put more pressure, that matter would have only be heard in January.
Eventually, when we got to the tribunal court, Elize and I, we then realized that actually not everyone is not English speaking. There was another maybe 50% of them that could speak English very well. But they always presented themselves as non-English speaking people from before.
Yeah.
Yeah, they really use that to say, when they can, they don't understand English, and when they, or they can, they play with it as it fits them and what is best suited for them.
Yeah. Okay, good stuff. Thanks, Elize, on that. So how can you, so we went through that process, and I don't want to say that we won the case, but the matter was resolved. In a nutshell, we won because we presented the facts and it was ruled in our favor. I was highly frustrated with the fact that there was a second point to the matter of now you should start paying rent. That the, should I call them a referee? What do you call them?
The presiding officer.
The presiding officer. What the presiding officer should have just said at that particular time, now you can start paying rent. And when I asked the question to say, okay, fine, so it's clear now who the landlord is, should they pay rent? And he says, no, it's not part of the case that was presented. If you want that matter to be presented, you need to go downstairs and log a claim and then come back again. I'm like, come on. We're all here. Why can you not pass that ruling now so that everyone knows and we all go back home knowing who's paying rent?
And unfortunately, there's many times that feeling that they want to deal with the matter as quickly as possible and get it out of their office. And if I remember correctly, we were there on a Friday as well. Yes. That I really think didn't help our matter, because they want to get rid of us as quickly as possible. Because on the one hand, they are entertaining some of the arguments of the other parties, but when you want commitment, they use that as an excuse. Which is very frustrating, because throughout everything we've made it clear, listen, this is this and they should pay rent. But I mean, they can't really, if technically there wasn't an agreement, they could have at least noted it as part of the mediation, because we are working on mediation stage and not the arbitration. And but the overall feeling is, listen, I've done my job. It's been resolved. Let's move on. Go out and go talk. I mean, I think it was been told to us many times, like, go out and go talk. If you guys don't agree, then come back and start afresh.
Okay. So we're on month number 3. No rental is coming in. Everybody's still staying there. Bevin now is trying to understand. Bevin, he's a Frost Peak manager and property managers, and they look after all of our properties, irrespective of where they are. Him and his team, they do a sterling job. Bevin, now you're trying to understand the who's who in the property. You've got a rent roll that Dan got from the landlord in the due diligence period. But this rent roll actually, because it was the husband giving this, all he had was Ben in unit number 1, Susan in unit number 3. He didn't even have proper paperwork to indicate who is staying in what unit. And now you need to clean this up. And I just want to put a disclaimer out there that when we're looking at these opportunities, these properties like these ones, this is where the money is. Because guys like these ones are failing to manage their properties. And you are now coming in to try to turn them around. But when you're turning it around, it comes with all sorts of problems. Bevin, what are some of the challenges that you have received post-managing this project? And I see a whole lot of people now on Facebook, they talk about these are COVID issues and all that. And I'm like thinking, but we kind of like, this is where we live. This is nothing new. But I want to leave it to Bevin, to give us an explanation of some of the challenges that you've picked up by just managing, and this was just pre-COVID, ne? So give us maybe 3 ones pre-COVID, and then you've got a whole lot post-COVID.
Sure. So maybe I'll start off. I like that whole introduction to the rental roll. So when I got the rental roll, it's to try and alleviate everyone's confusion. We've gone down to the point where this is unit number 1 adjacent to the gate, and then this is unit number 2, the opposite side of the gate, downstairs. This is unit number 3, opposite side of the gate, upstairs, and it so underneath this and behind this. So it's very specific as to where each tenant is, because we're trying to get away from the confusion. What we'll eventually do is, okay, great, we've got the system dialed in. There's no way that the tenants can make things murky anymore. We'll go, okay, on the door, there's your number. That's the number. That's the same number that's on your lease. It's the same number that's on your invoices. So again, this is in phases of how we are trying to keep things as clear as possible for this group of tenants who are taking advantage. And I mean, it has been interesting because we start unpacking that. Yes, we've got a rental roll, and the values are, at the moment, we're sitting at a 3,500 Rand total rent that we can collect on this, 30,500 that we can collect on this property. And we sort of had to lose a little bit because of that situation that Daniel was talking about, where we needed to correct some of the stuff on the property, which meant one of the rooms that was actually meant to be the kitchen had to be converted back into the kitchen. So we lost the previous, or the seller's value that he was putting onto the rental roll. So that's something that's trimmed off a bit of fat on us. But again, it's still great returns on this investment. So we still positive on the M5 side. But now, yes, we've lost a little bit, but now that we're in the property, we're solidly managing the property, we're now aware that there are some rooms or some units in the property that are including or have included in there more than one room. And what the tenants, by their old arrangements, have been doing is then they subletting those additional rooms. So we're then dealing with that sort of thing. And what that actually means to us is a room that's currently getting 3,000 Rand, because it's listed by the seller as a room, and that's the previous agreement, has a future potential of 4,500 to 5,000 Rand. So we're going to actually be able to bump up the rental roll in the future. So there's new phases and good opportunities in the future. Now, maybe coming back to our current situation, as Frost Peak, we've now inherited this property. I think it was definitely the best thing we could have done for ourselves by making sure that our own management company was taking control of this property.
Right.
Because you can imagine, like, I'm even feeling like I want to say, hey, shot, TJ, thanks for putting me into this mess. You can keep it. So, and walking away. So, like,
I
but
need
now,
to check in with you every day to see whether you're still my partner, is it?
yeah, exactly. You got to share lots of love at the moment. Whereas the opposite is the fact, yeah, where, like, as a result of our partnership and my invested interest in this property, I have to give it 100% attention to make sure that I can extract my value from this property long term. So, like, whereas a normal agent would go, hey, too much of a problem, wash my hands of it and move on.
Yeah.
So I think, like, it's been brilliant that we are in control of this property. We are going to be managing this property. And it means we're busy fine-tuning it with the long-term vision in mind. So that's been very valuable for us. And
So I
we've
just want to ask a question there, Bev.
Yes.
Today is the 29th of April, so you're busy collecting rent. Last month, what was your collection looking like?
So for the month of April, our collections were quite low. So we took a knock on this property for the month of April, went down to about 50%.
Okay.
But for the month of March, we managed to get our collections back into space. We were then at about 85% collections on this property.
With all these problems that we have spotted, and you still have many other problems, right?
100%.
Let's jump on to another point that I'd like us to talk about, which is more importantly around the handover. So Dan got the rent roll, and you try to make it work. You've got a good handle on the rent roll now. You already know who's in their names, their IDs, their Aslam paperwork, their marriage numbers. What you are short of is someone's bank card and its PIN number, right? So well done on that, you and the team. Each and every unit has a prepaid meter. Okay?
For electricity, yeah.
Right. We got a list of the prepaid meter. And at one point, you gave an instruction to say, guys, I just want to double sure. I want to make sure. Bevin is make sure. I want to make sure whether these are the correct meters. And you requested for pictures and so on. And our lead GC, our lead general contractor, he went out, he took pictures of each unit. It was actually problematic to get in some of the other units. But eventually he got all the pictures of the unit. We've got one service provider that we like to work with for prepaids. And we asked that we would like to move there. But now in your moving, you had a bigger problem now with prepaid meters. What was your discovery?
So maybe just taking it back a step. So when we received information from the seller, he said, this is the service provider. This is my information. You can now transfer accounts into your name. So we took that information, we transferred accounts. The service provider then took those meters and said, okay, great, we've registered all these meters. There you go. They're all registered under you as a company. Now, what happens is, unfortunately, you're going month to month. So there's these huge gaps in the middle of the month where you're actually not getting any information, you're not able to track anything. So we're getting the report at the end of the month, and after the first month it was like, well, this room isn't using electricity, that room isn't using electricity, and so on and so on. So you kind of start having these warning bells where, hey, there's a problem on this property. And again, so we sent our general contractor back in, say, hey, please go and assess what's the situation. No, there's definitely electricity to those units. Go back to the service provider. They say, no, they definitely are meters. So now we're stuck in the middle. And eventually, through making sure, digging deeper, we realized, like, hang on, these meters, half of the meters are with a completely separate service provider, which is, now we know that those tenants are putting money in and are paying, that money's going to a different service provider. So we didn't have any control over those. We couldn't test and record any of the information as a result. So that was, I think that was frustrating for us. And I think thankfully the doctor has been very honest, where that money that has gone to him is then transferred across to the company anyway. So that's at least something that's positive about it. It could have been worse, where he would have gone, hey, I've got no idea what you're talking about. So since then, we've corrected that. We now have line of sight on all of those meters. Our next step now, because we've got control of the existing meters under the separate service providers, is we'll then move them into our preferred service provider. Right. And when I say preferred service provider, we want a uniform system where we're not interpreting and translating different ways of reporting. It's one report that gets sent to us. It all links into everything, and it's easy to translate. And likewise, if we've got an issue, we just call them up and say, hey, listen, this is Bevin from Peak.Property at X address. Please just validate what's happening on that property. And that makes it a lot more streamlined. Because of how big we are as M5, we rarely are in the position where we can have too many varieties of service providers. And in this situation, it gives us the ability to control that a lot more freely. So I'm quite positive about that going forward on the meters.
Yeah, that's a good one. Thanks, Bevin. Someone, neighbor is asking here, there is no legal binding law that the seller must do a proper handover to the buyer. Neighbor, the thing, neighbor, is that when you are managing, right? Let me answer that question in a different way. You know, Papa and Moroho, it's got different levels. If I come to your house, my expectation is this, that it needs to be saved in this way. But if I go to someone's house, right, it's different, right? The Moroho soup could be running that way, and the Papa is sitting that way. And the reality of it is that people's managing styles are extremely vast. It's like from A to Z. You get people that are, and I think what I'd like to mention here around Doctor, he's been forthcoming in conversations that I've had with him to say, I've got a problem. My wife used to manage this for me, but this is my problem right now. I don't know how to manage it. So if you get some of those meters that are incorrectly managed, that you are seeing that are not on that property, please tell me. They're actually sitting somewhere I just don't know, right? So there's a person he's actually offloading his properties. The next best thing that I'm now doing with Doctor is to say, well, which other properties can I also take from you? Because now I know his problems. I know that his problem is managing. I can either just do managing via Frostpeak to manage his business for him, or I can buy it because now it's a new headache to him that he is faced with. And those are some of the other opportunities that are there. But there is no law that kind of like dictates how you should have Pap and Moroho, you know. I thought, let me just throw out that example. We've gone about an hour into the conversation, and I was hoping that we're like a straight hour into it. But maybe let's take another 5 to 10 minutes wrapping this up. And I think it is very clear to everyone that some of the challenges that we have had, they've seen it. There's some solutions around it. And I want to come back to Elize and say, Elize, we were having a conversation with one particular person around problematic tenants like this. And you mentioned the fact that you actually had not a partner, but someone that you know in the community who struggled with such kind of a problem for almost close to 3 years.
Yeah, that was absolutely true. I think the first thing is people have to realize how you deal with tenants depends on the area. You get different types of tenants. And I think that's one thing I definitely learned is your tenants in a setup like this is going to be different that you deal with a tenant in for example, a Randburg area just in the house, one tenant, one house.
Right.
But this person actually said, they took over a project like this, and to be able to, get rid of the non-paying tenants or get them to behave and actually pay every month for at least 3 consecutive months, took them 3 years. And he said he almost had a permanent office in the housing tribunal because, they know, and it's being advertised so freely to say, if you have a problem, go to the tribunal. And because it's a lengthy process. So I have to say to Bevin and them, the team has dealt with it so good, considering the circumstances.
Okay, good stuff. Can I try to wrap up now? I'm going to ask a question directly to all of you. With this deal in place, we are almost getting into a comfortable space, but obviously COVID has come in. Bevin, you were on the brink of evicting some of the guys on a good merit. So you would say, I'm evicting you. So you were telling the people there that you want to do your renovations, which is true. That's what you want to do. And you just don't have a place for them. And some of them had agreed. Some of them were pushing back for another couple of days to stay there. But then COVID kicked in, so they can't go anywhere. Do they continue paying rent? Do they not pay rent? Because already you've discussed with them to move out. And if this continues, we're starting to see in some places rental is dropping because you've got people that are working as waiters, salespeople, and all of those things. What's your view on this property that we're talking about? You got, I think, 13 units, 13 tenants.
The biggest learning I've had in general from this whole biggest learning I've had in general from the whole COVID impact is relationships are so important. So our big thing is communication the whole way through. So this property, unfortunately, we already had what we almost call a predator tenant. Those tenants who know exactly how to manipulate the situation. So like they would have sort of hopped on the fact that, oh no, full moon is only tomorrow and low tide in Durban is next week. Any excuse they would have found, they would have taken advantage of. So that's a reality on this property specifically. But relationships are important where you're going, okay, great. I know what my tenant is employed as. I know what they can afford to pay rent. I know that they're a good payer, and therefore I know historically they've been a good payer. In the future, they're going to be a good payer.
Sure.
So I would rather look after this tenant that I know is good and have them in the future than inherit someone else's bad tenant to fill the vacancy that I have as a result of kicking this tenant out. Because that's like, we've had this discussion internally. The reality is, after COVID-19, the market is going to be flooded with tenants who couldn't afford to pay their rent, tenants who have defaulted, and tenants whose landlords have just not considered. Ubuntu side of it and looked at how do I give to you at the same time as I get. So I think for us, look after who you have. If they're good, look after them. If they were bad before COVID-19, they're taking advantage of it now. They're going to be bad afterwards. So those tenants that we'd already given notice to that we cancelled their lease agreements, after the lockdown is lifted, they will need to leave the property because their lease no longer stands.
Yeah.
However, as the president says, people can't move now and they have to pay their rent because they are getting a roof over their head.
Sure.
Us as landlords, we are still having to pay the rates and taxes. We are still having to pay the bonds. So it's really a case of Ubuntu, where what's good for you is also good for us. And we've got to make sure we look after each other in this space.
Okay. There's some good points there that you mentioned, dude. So let me go back to the property itself. I think my closing comment is going to be, I get excited when I see the lead GC reporting on the group, because this particular property is very entertaining, if I may call it that.
Yeah, thanks, teacher.
Yeah, it is.
So, as a property manager, what are some of the things? I mean, I used to be in the same shoes that you're wearing now. A while ago, before we started Frostproof, and we used to manage properties in different areas, together. You used to do that in Durban. I was doing that here in Johannesburg. But we've always had fascinating people in Johannesburg. What is one story that you can share with us that has been fascinating to you as a person, of some of the things that have happened at this property here? I mean, my one, the most fascinating one was when the lady, it was a video that our GC was taking, and the one lady was kind of like fighting with the other lady. And she was coming to our GC and saying, do not take this video. And I felt like my own GC is being threatened here. But some of the fascinating stories, yeah.
Yeah, so I think that lady's got a love-hate relationship with our GC on the property.
Yeah.
Like, he'll send me videos of her brushing her teeth outside, and he says, look at how, like, the risk is of this, like, she needs to brush her teeth inside the bathroom, like, obviously health issues at the moment. So he was frustrated about that.
Yeah.
The most recent one is we've started becoming concerned about the high water usage on the property.
Okay.
So my whole thing of making sure, let's check what the usage is. And we realized there's a high usage on the property. So one of the things we put in place was, after 10 o'clock at night, let's turn off the water so as we can monitor what happens between that space. And we're doing readings at 10 o'clock when we turn it off. We were doing readings in the morning when we turned it off, making sure that there weren't any issues.
Who's doing the readings? Yeah.
So this is now a GC who we've now
So you got an allocated caretaker
into the property. Correct, yeah.
Okay.
So he's living on the property. He's got our interest at heart.
Sure.
He's separate from all the other tenants.
Right.
And yeah, so he would turn off the water at 10 o'clock, turn it on again the next morning at 6 o'clock. So what happened is, maybe 2 or 3 days into this, he gets up in the morning to turn on the water. Water's already on, goes into the house. There's taps that have been opened during the night that are running. So over the space of, I think it was 6 hours, so 8 hours through the night, we had lost 2,000 liters of water. So I mean, I just think of that, it's a huge amount of wastage. So, and you can imagine, so the caretaker basically went to the tenants. He would have lost his temper with them. We're trying to make sure that you guys don't have to pay extra water. Yeah, we're trying to help you. And one of the tenants ended up attacking him. So the caretaker ended up running down the road. We immediately, that's not on in any space, never mind in your own property. Like, violence is not acceptable. So we had him report that tenant to the police, and that tenant was then locked up as a result. So unfortunately, he ran away from the police. So we're yet to find out what happens on that. But yeah, like, there's really weird and wonderful things that happen. Yeah.
Yeah.
Entertaining.
Anyways, I think in our 3-4 years, this is the one property where it's fascinating to see, the caliber of people that are just staying there. But it just tells you the caliber of your tenant that you bring in. It's going to be X-rated or not, or it's just going to be calm. I want to close off the session by asking a question to you directly, guys, and say, what is the one thing that you have learned on here that we can do to improve us onto the next deal, whenever that is going to come through?
Can I start?
Ladies, sit down.
No, that's right. That's okay.
He's so eager. He's so eager.
Yeah.
I have to say the one thing that I've learned here is firstly divide and conquer. Because the moment that we sort of got the tenants no longer to be in one group, strong, and we started to say to them, there's a one person just speaking on behalf of you is not maybe in your interest, we started really winning. That's the first thing. And then really the early meeting phase, really, but I know sometimes one don't really want to, because it's obvious. The letter is setting out everything nicely. There should be no confusion about it. But having that quick meeting, if you see there's going to be a problem, that you immediately meet with them one-on-one. I think that is actually one of the two things that I've really, really learned from this property.
Cool. Thank you, Elize. Mr. Moropdi.
Oh, yes. Yeah. Basically, guys, I am at the core face of this, okay? Because I'm the one that finds the property and, you pass it on to the next person. Basically, I'm the one that gives people hospital passes like this one. So one of the biggest things that are not paying rent, but they're highly educated and they know what they do.
Right.
They can work around the law, twist it, turn it within the confines of the law to actually benefit them. And it's not that they are trying to run away from certain things, but they do that in a very sophisticated way. Hence, they had the mob mentality, a good mentality, where they had the president and the deputy president representing them. And, you couldn't speak to individuals, you had to speak to these two people that would translate, and they would discuss it, and as a mob come back and give you an answer. That was one of the first things that I've learned. And the second thing is how to protect myself from the seller. Basically, we've discussed that the seller, people sell properties for reasons, but we're not just buying properties, we're buying businesses.
Yeah.
Okay, these are commercial businesses that we are buying that we want to make profitable so that we can grow our business. So how do we best protect ourselves on that one? And that will go to Neba's question as well. Basically, what I have learned is to make sure that I milk the part of the OTP that has special conditions in it. I actually have a whole addendum now on that as to what I need to happen. So the seller is not obliged to hand over the property, properly to me. But I can put that within the confines of the law. I can put that in my addendum and force him to do that, because it's part of my conditions, and if he has accepted it, he has to then, uphold it. So we put that in our addendum, and our addendum at the moment is something like 2 pages instead of that little paragraph that you usually have on your OTP. So it's now about 2 pages of everything. So we make sure that once the seller has accepted the sale price, we make sure we go through every single list that they have, all the payments that they get, the rental, the water, the meters, everything, to make us feel comfortable enough for me to then take it from my side and give it to Bevin on the first Peak side, and make sure that Elize and Bevin have an easier job managing the property, taking it to a better level, and we can actually extract the ROI that we so much anticipated. So at the core phase of it, my addendum is my Bible.
You've got a wishful list, brother. I should say that, because the reality of our business is that we're going out there to look for properties that are not being well managed, whether the seller maybe could be distressed. Look at Doctor. He couldn't tell you who's there, Is it a deal breaker? No, really. But that just puts Bevin and team on to work harder to turn the property around. So I think the learnings that I'm getting from you is that, yes, you want to tighten up your OTP, but as you're seeing an opportunity, you also want to leave off that and then close the deal. That's what I'm seeing there. Because one of the other things that comes to mind, but we've always spoken about this. When do we inherit and when do we not inherit tenants? We've spoken at length, and it's really on a deal by deal case. Some days we feel comfortable, some days we don't. But there's no answer to it. You can inherit, get some problems, or not get some problems. If you get some problems, but what are the things that you can do if you inherit? Can you double check? And now we're having triple checks before we inherit. So those are some of the things that we need to do, because we're seeing that we're getting learning as we go along. Right. Bevin, your closing comments on your learnings, things that you want to improve here.
I've got 2 things. Firstly, I'll start off positive, because really this is a fantastic property. 2,000 square meters is phenomenal when your normal property in Joburg is 495 square meters.
Yeah.
So it's like 4 properties in one. Never mind the fact that there's these multiple buildings on the property.
Yeah.
When I went to this property in January, you could just see the sense of community on the property, the kids running around. The wall is about a 3-meter high wall on the outside. It's got an extra 1 meter of spikes on top of it. So these huge palisade droppers on top of the wall. So it's super secure. The driveway entrance is like a solid gate. There's a pedestrian gate. So there's no vulnerability around it. Your kids, there's plenty of space for the kids to play. And so like for me, it's a beautiful property for the multi-let environment. Each family has their own space. Exactly. And it's a community.
Yeah.
So like great potential, long-term, presently it's fantastic. So yeah, it's a good asset for our group. Then a learning for me has really come to that introduction to the tenants. And that's where Frost Peak was introducing themselves as the new managing agent, and M5 was also at the same time being introduced as a new owner. And for me, that I think is what gave the tenants the most leverage to create chaos. So for me, in the future, one of the things that I would like to put in place is that on properties like this, where we decide to keep the tenants going forward, we have the owner introduce us as the property manager while they are still owning the property. And we then take over the rental role. We then put it into our systems, continue to pay the seller his rental income. And then when the transfer goes through and it moves into M5's name, then there's no management change that happens after transfer. The management continues to flow. The tenants don't know in the background that the ownership has changed. Things just continue to tick over. Whether it's going to be black and white like that in reality is another story, because some landlords will want to hold on to control up until transfer. That all comes down to our skill and art as negotiators in the relationship side.
100%. Bevin, thanks a lot on that. But I also want to stipulate the fact that, we started off M5 Experience as our school of learning, and we are learning as we are doing. This is valueless, to anyone out there who's wanting to do property. You can see how fascinating it can become. You can see how serious it can become. You can see how it can run away with the deal. You can see how you can lose money or make money, right? And for me, M5 Experience is this particular going to sit in M5 Experience. And anyone who comes through in M5 Experience, provided they are a member, they can learn. So what I'm basically saying here is the opportunity, if you're listening and you're like, so what is this M5 Experience all about? Basically, it's videos like these ones where we jump in, we have a discussion of a live deal, something that we have done. We dissect it, and if we want, we can zoom in into one area, like for instance, the tribunal court, how to manage it. All of those short videos can be in there. And at the moment, we're still running lifetime access for $997. You can click on one of the links that we're going to put in there, and you can sign up and get educated. The idea is you get educated, and if you want to go and do it out there on your own, but if you're one of those people who are like Paul, or like, I don't want to do this on my own, I think that I could be traveling all over the world. Then you want to find good partners, people who are like us, who are doing it every day, who have already cut their teeth, and we can partner up with you on the other deals that are coming through. But gang, thanks a lot for dialing in. My apology that technology couldn't get us in onto Facebook, but I think it could have been a great session. But on the other hand, this is now a video that we have put out there, and it can stay available and people can consume and get educated. Thanks a lot, guys. Stay well and God bless.
Thank you. It was awesome.
Thank you.
Yes.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Bye.